Hello, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israel mourns the 10 victims of last week's deadly flash flood. America's new head of state meets Prime Minister Netanyahu in Jerusalem. And great news for sports fans, an Israeli athlete just made NBA history. Israelis across the nation are still in shock following the deaths of 10 teenagers in a flash flood just a few days ago. The group belonging to a pre-army training academy had left school for a desert trek near the Dead Sea when disaster struck. Making this tragedy all the more painful is the fact that most of the country had been shut down due to the intensity of the off-season rains. Yet for some reason, this field trip was still allowed to press on. 7 of the 10 teens have just been laid to rest in what was clearly a very painful ceremony. The remaining 3 are to be buried later today. The victims, 9 girls and 1 boy, were swept away by floodwaters on Thursday following 2 similar deaths in Israel and the Palestinian territories a day earlier. Though Israeli leaders, including Prime Minister Netanyahu, have lamented the tragedy of so many youth's lives cut short, others are demanding answers for how this avoidable tragedy was made possible. At this time, the school's instructor and principal have both been arrested on suspicion of negligent homicide. One of the guides on the trip is currently in house arrest as well, but has told investigators that she actually protested against the hike. A text message sent out by the trip's organizers shortly before that fateful day claimed the hike had been greenlit with all the relevant authorities, but officials at the Ministry of Education say they were unaware any such trip was even planned. Amidst this tragedy, testimony from the survivors has revealed a beacon of hope from the horror. When disaster struck, one of the victims, a student named Tzur Alif, who dreamed of serving in the IDF's elite rescue unit, sacrificed his life to help save student after student from the deadly floodwaters. Thousands have gathered for a candlelight vigil in Tel Aviv, and this is a tragedy the country will not soon forget. The United States officially has a new Secretary of State. Former CIA Director Mike Pompeo was sworn into office late last week and almost immediately jumped on a plane to begin his first official Middle East tour.
No other secretary in recent history has gone on a trip as quickly as he has.
The new head of state has already met with NATO in Brussels and top leaders in Saudi Arabia, and he'll meet today with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu in Jerusalem. The question on everyone's mind, of course, is what will be the fate of American involvement in the Iranian nuclear deal. President Trump is widely believed to have fired his previous top advisors, including former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, in favor of people like Pompeo, who favor nixing the deal altogether. While Trump has maintained that the deal is one of the worst he's ever seen, European leaders have almost unanimously been working to save the deal, arguing that it has successfully slowed Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. Trump has until May 12th to either re-sign the deal or withdraw the U.S. from it altogether. Pompeo's talk today with Netanyahu will most likely address both of these possible outcomes.
You asked if we talked about the decision. There's been no decision made. So the team is working, and I'm sure we'll have lots of conversations to deliver what the president has made clear. Absent a substantial fix, absent overcoming the shortcomings, the flaws of the deal, he is unlikely to stay in that deal past this May.
Joining me now with more on the upcoming deadline to reaffirm United States' commitment to the JCPOA nuclear agreement is Dr. Danny Orbach, military historian from the Department of Asian Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and Dr. Martin Sherman, founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. Thank you both very much for coming back into the studio. So, Dr. Orbach, I'm going to start with you. Pompeo, during his first leg of the trip, he's landing in Riyadh, and he spoke with Saudi officials about potentially introducing new sanctions against Iran. First of all, do you think that that would be an effective tool if the United States were to both reaffirm the deal and put sanctions? And B, do you even think that that's really legal under the terms of the deal?
First of all, we need to see that Pompeo is trying to convince the convinced. It's not difficult to convince Saudi Arabia or Israel that new sanctions need to be applied on Iran. The real difficulty is to convince the Europeans. The second question is what the Trump administration actually wants. And I think that's unclear. Personally, I don't believe that this administration has a coherent Iran strategy, but if it has, then there are two options. Either they are trying to impose more sanctions to press Iran and the Europeans to some kind of a better deal. There are three main points: the ballistic missile program of Iran, there is the point of the Iranian involvement in the Middle East, there is this point of inspections in military bases, and finally the deadline of 10 years, after which some of the sanctions are going to phase out. So either they want a better deal, to arrive at a better deal by applying more pressure, or they want to blow up the deal altogether. I'm not sure that they're completely certain what they do want.
Dr. Sherman, do you think that Trump is trying to blow up the deal, and to what end? I mean, what would his policy then have to be?
You know, I think this is a deal that's impossible to fix and has to be nixed. If you look at everything that's happened since 2015, when this unfortunate accord was put together, we can see how catastrophic the Obama policy was, and in many ways how imbecilic the Israeli opposition was in trying to prevent or undermining Netanyahu's efforts to stop it. And this is a real mea culpa moment for the Israeli opposition, who I remember the head of the opposition saying he trusts President Obama to get a good deal. Well, obviously his trust was misplaced. Look, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to roll back what we had in place before. The sanctions brought Iran to the table. I think it's going to be extremely difficult to institute them. And I think that in the short run, the only thing that will cause Iran to back away from its adventurism across the world, including its nuclear power, its nuclear program, is a credible, coercive option that will convince Iran that their infrastructure, their bridges, their dams, their power stations are in danger. Because we remember what happened in 2000.
So are you speaking militarily then?
They must believe it is a credible threat, because if they don't, nothing will stop them. Look,
so you're suggesting we get rid of the Iranian deal and go to war?
Well, Iran must believe that the United States will be prepared to do that, because if they don't, nothing will stop them from carrying on and eventually reaching a nuclear power and being a rogue nation with all this strategic capacity.
But that means that one of two things will happen following that point. Either the Iranians believe it and everything goes great, and then a war breaks out, or they call it bluff.
In 2003, at least a school of thought according to which the Iranians shut down their nuclear program because of the assertive and robust American action in their neighborhood, in Iraq. The Iranians will not be convinced by any kind of negotiations, in the short run, unless they know there is a credible threat militarily against them. They will carry on with their program. In the long run, the only solution is regime change, which of course the Obama deal would, by enriching them economically, the current regime enriching it economically, empowering it militarily, and entrenching it politically, has made more remote. So I think at the moment we're between a rock and a hard place.
I completely disagree with my colleague here. I think it's the same story of 2003 all over again. In 2003, the US used misguided information and attacked Iraq to achieve regime change and to make geopolitical changes in the region. The result was a complete disaster. It would happen again with Iran.
That's not my point. That's not my point. My point is that they backed away from the nuclear. They backed away from their nuclear program when they saw a credible military threat in the neighborhood. The fact how the Iraqi war was
that's Iraq, and this is Iraq. But this is not Iraq is the problem. And the second is that their economy isn't in the same position it was years ago when they came to formulate this deal with Obama.
With all the saber rattling in Iran at the moment, they've got very difficult problems at the moment. They've got a huge water crisis, which is going to cause millions of people to relocate. They've got spiraling unemployment, which hasn't been affected by the lifting of the sanctions. They've got great domestic unrest here. People are walking around with signs, according to Al Jazeera, saying death to Rouhani, and no to Palestine, no to Gaza. I'm prepared to give my life for Iran, but not for Lebanon, and things like that. So there's huge unrest there, and trying to reach an acceptable agreement with Iran by anything that has less than a credible coercive threat behind it is, in my opinion, fooling ourselves. By the way, I might agree with my colleague here that the Iraqi war was badly conducted, but that's got nothing to do.
Right.
The United States has proved that it can bring down any regime with air power and special forces in Iraq, in Serbia. They can bring it down. To build another regime after that, that's a completely different question. But in Iran, that's probably much easier than it is in Iraq.
Except Serbia, no regime has been brought down only with air power. You must use military. You must use ground forces.
But you must use some ground forces, mainly special forces.
So the question again is then who's going to fight that fight? Because you have so far, actually, we've just heard that 80,000 Iranian troops are just in Damascus. You have the United States, you have Russian forces, you have Syrian forces.
That's the question. But democracies have to decide at some stage if they're not going to fight and win wars that they can choose. They might be forced into a war of necessity, which will cost them much more, which basically what happened in the Second World War. The Second World War, when the West backed away from restraining Germany when they could do it, they entered the Second World War, which was the greatest human catastrophe to date.
All right. Well, my final question, Dr. Auerbach, I'll bring it back to you. Let's assume that let's assume that the United States leaves the deal. Okay, what should Israel's immediate reaction then be? Should we be bracing for impact, and how so?
I think Israel should prepare to a confrontation with Iran in any case, but especially if the United States is going to blow up the deal. Because what's going to happen is that the other partners of Iran, the EU, maybe China, certainly Russia, will just break the sanctions, trade with Iran freely, will get a much stronger Iran, unrestrained by a deal. I think that's the introduction to a regional confrontation.
All right, Dr. Daniel Auerbach, Dr. Martin Sherman, thank you both very much for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, now this was the 5th consecutive weekend of clashes between Palestinians and the IDF security forces along the Gaza border. At this time, 4 Palestinians are believed to have been killed in these latest demonstrations, including a 15-year-old. These numbers place the overall death toll at 45 fatalities since the Hamas-sponsored March of Return protest began. Though the terror group claims this is merely a non-violent protest, Israeli forces have reported countless instances of Palestinians attempting to destroy the security barrier or use rocks, weapons, and firebombs to overrun the border. The IDF maintains that it uses force, sometimes lethal force, only in instances where security is threatened. These protests sometimes draw tens of thousands of Palestinians to the border, where tire fires and mobs look anything but non-violent. At the same time, however, Israel has been fiercely criticized for its use of live fire, and is often accused of using lethal force inappropriately. This is actually the 2nd teenaged Palestinian killed by IDF bullets, in addition to 2 Palestinian journalists.
And it's difficult to see how children, even those throwing stones, can present a threat of imminent death or serious injury to heavily protected security force personnel. In the words of the High Commissioner, images of a child being shot as he runs away from the Israeli security forces are downright shocking. And he was referring to the case of 14-year-old Mohammed Ayoub, who was killed by a bullet to the head on the 20th of April.
To make matters worse, these clashes are building up to the May 15th anniversary of Israel's Independence Day and the opening of the American embassy in Jerusalem. Troops are already bracing ahead of time as the worst of the bloodshed may still be yet to come. All right, now we've been following the apparent rise of anti-Semitism and even anti-Semitic hate crimes in Germany for quite some time now. Jewish leaders in Germany have said that the situation has become so bad that Jews shouldn't wear their kippah or a Jewish skull cap in public. But now it looks like the public has finally had enough of the hate, and today Jewish and non-Jewish activists together are joining and handing out 10,000 kippot for an event that they call #KippahHeadsUp. The idea is to unite the streets of Berlin for participants regardless of religion by experiencing what it feels like to be Jewish in Germany. Organizers say that this isn't supposed to be political in any way. There's no political motive or even political parties involved. It's just been meant to as a wake-up call to combat the countless instances of anti-Semitism that seem to have skyrocketed throughout Germany in recent months and years. This issue became particularly public last week when an Arab Israeli man decided to wear a kippah as an experiment to see if the rumors of anti-Semitism in Germany were true. He was assaulted and beaten with a belt shortly thereafter. A video capturing the incident quickly erupted all over social media, causing Jewish leaders in Germany to fear the worst. But that incident gave rise to a similar protest called Berlin Wears Kippah, which saw thousands of Germans putting on the Jewish skullcap to condemn anti-Semitism. Though it's truly chilling to see anti-Semitism on the rise in Germany, of all places, these demonstrations have brought together Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike, a much-needed reminder that only love can truly defeat hate. Israeli Arabs make up about 21% of the population, but a common issue that the country still faces is integrating this population into the economy. A 2017 survey put the Israeli Arab employment rate at about 42.5%, well below that of their secular Jewish counterparts. Well, NGO Tzofen has been working for the better part of a decade to change that. And joining me now is Tzofen's chairman of the board, Dr. Hamza Halabi. Thank you very much for coming in. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure.
All right, so tell me a little bit about Tzofen, first of all.
Yeah, first of all, Tzofen is a non-governmental organization, non-profit organization. We work together, Jews and Arabs, in order to integrate the Arab society into the Israeli economy, and especially by the leading industry, which is the high-tech industry. And we start working since 9 years ago, and we have good achievements.
Yeah, I mean, what have you kind of accomplished so far?
Yeah, first of all, 9 years ago, we have only 300 engineers in the industry. Now we have about more than 4,000
Wow.
engineers. It's good. It's the good news,
Sure.
but the bad news, that's only 4%. Right. And we have another achievements like making Nazareth as a development center, high-tech center. We have more than 1,000 engineers that work inside Nazareth this time. 10% of them are Jewish engineers.
And you're also partnering with other kind of municipalities to build these types of centers, job centers elsewhere in Israel?
Yeah, after the successful story of Nazareth, now we are going to spread to other areas like Kfar Kasem, which is a triangle area, and the Negev, and maybe another municipality in the north. And it's very important because it can help the self-income on the municipality. And as a former mayor, can tell you that's very important.
Well, and I understand that the government also has certain initiatives in place to kind of aid the employment of the Arab sector. Maybe can you speak very quickly on that?
Yes. First of all, we are talking now about the important decision of historic decision of the Israeli government that decided to invest 20 million shekel in a developing area, industrial areas, high-tech areas, and commerce in the Arab municipalities. And it's include the 5 years decision of the government to invest about 15 billion shekel in Arab municipalities in Israel. Wow. It's a historic moment for us.
Yeah, it's a massive investment, and I look forward to seeing the results of that, and I wish, obviously, way more employment and way more integration in the Arab sector. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I did want to mention very briefly that you have an employment conference coming up. Is that right?
Yeah.
Very quickly?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. The Tzofen's employment conference where kind of people can come and find work in the tech sector, engineering sector, etc.
We would like to have another 2,000 engineers in there, and of course it can create thousands of jobs in services and transportation of all that for the Arab society, and maybe we can help to integrate more and more the Arabs into the Israeli miracle economy.
All right, well, I hope so. Thank you very much, Dr. Halabi.
Hopefully. Thank you.
Kabbalah can be described as a mystical school of thought that originates in Judaism with its own set of spiritual principles that people such as Madonna, Ashton Kutcher, and other famous celebrities have at least in part subscribed to. Well, one couple went further, opening up a boutique hotel in the spiritual Kabbalah center of Tzfat, and ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh has the details.
Thanks, Aaron. Well, like you said, a lot of celebs over the years have shown support for the Kabbalah Center, even making their way to Tel Aviv to the Judo Kabbalah Center just to show their support. But now native New Yorker Janine Barrel and her Israeli-born husband, Roni Barrel, wanted to capture the intrinsic quality of the spiritual wisdom as well as the received traditions with their new hotel called The Way Inn, reportedly named the world's first Kabbalah hotel.
All right, so I mean, it looks like for people both who are and are not into Kabbalah, this is going to be amazing. And I see, from some of these pictures, they look beautifully. Like, what What more can we expect from this hotel?
Well, Janine Barrell, one of the founders of this hotel, which actually has been running for 2 years now, says that her idea for this hotel is a contemporary take on Jewish renewal and spirituality, and does pay respects to the traditional characteristics of the Kabbalah movement in many ways. She does mention, though, that the Way Inn Hotel does not have any affiliation with the Kabbalah Center in Tel Aviv.
I see. All right. Well, you also said that the hotel is based on spiritual ideologies. So what are some of the traditional characteristics that can be noted in this hotel?
Well, the hotel has 7 suites, and they are named after and inspired by the 7 spiritual principles of the Kabbalah, said to be found on the Tree of Life, which is the central mystical symbol used. The 7 principles being discipline, kindness, adornment, eternity, majesty, foundation, and kingdom. Each room can be identified with different colors based on the energy of each principle.
I'm sure each is uniquely decorated,
Right.
you know, to match with its own spiritual and traditional twist to it. It's probably out of this world to see that.
Right, yeah. Apparently each room has a painting of leading Kabbalah figures on the wall, paired with vintage furniture to give it a minimal and modest look in order to really allow the guests to focus on the energy of the city and the hotel itself.
All right, well, I would definitely check it out. Manuel, thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Okay, now huge news, sports fans. Israeli-born NBA player TJ Leaf has just entered history books. He is now the first ever Israeli athlete to officially play in the NBA Finals. Leaf, who plays forward for the Indiana Pacers, was on court for the final 3 minutes of the Pacers-Cavaliers game, and it all happened less than 24 hours before his 21st birthday, which is some awesome B-Day present. Leaf is the 3rd Israeli player to draft into the NBA. Though arguably not as high profile as other Israeli players like Omri Caspi, Leaf was nevertheless a first-round draft pick for the Pacers last June. The power forward is originally from Tel Aviv and lived there until he was 2. His father is a well-known Israeli basketball player as well. TJ returned to Israel in his teens to play for Israel's under-19 national team, which primed him for a top spot in the NBA shortly thereafter. He hasn't gotten a ton of time on the court as of late, and his career-high score of 17 points still leaves room to grow. Also, the Pacers just trounced the Cleveland Cavaliers 121-87 and now stand 3-3 overall in the playoffs. But for Israelis, Leaf's layup into sports history is reason enough to cheer. Maybe the Cavaliers will go all the way this year, putting Leaf into a whole nother level of superstardom. As if breaking basketball records wasn't enough, Israeli athletes have just made an incredible series of wins in another sport, Judo. The Israeli national team has just snagged an impressive 4 medals at the European Judo Championships. The finals were actually held right here in Tel Aviv, where Israeli judokas snagged 3 bronze medals and 1 gold. Sagi Muki, who is arguably one of Israel's most renowned athletes, competed in the under 81 kilogram division, scoring the gold medal at this year's games. He also scored the gold back in 2015 and was on track to medal at the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. But 2 slipped discs in his back ultimately took him out of the running. This year, though, hundreds of Israelis were there to cheer him on, as Muki competed against Belgium champ Sami Chuchi. Well, clearly a home turf advantage doesn't hurt, and Muki walked away with the win. Peter Palchik scored a bronze in the 100 kilogram category in the games' final day, and Israeli competitors Geffen Primo and Tal Flicker each grabbed a bronze in their respective categories as well, giving Israel 4 medals when all was said and done. Judo has quickly erupted into a worldwide phenomenon, especially in Arab countries, where athletes have traditionally refused to even share the mat with Israeli players. So last October, Israeli judoka Tal Flicker scored a gold medal at the Abu Dhabi Grand Slam, where neither his flag nor his national anthem were allowed to grace the arena after his win. And now it's time for our Hebrew word of the day. In times of despair, sometimes the silver lining is seeing how many people ultimately come together to do the right thing. And that's why today's word is le'ached, which means to unite. If history has taught us anything, it's that we can pretty much do anything we want when we decide to le'ached or unite. The Avengers do it, and those kids who summoned Captain Planet do it. So when a worthy cause comes up, we should all me'ached or unite too, right? Right. Now, 2 heads are usually better than 1, so if you have the opportunity to le'ached, I highly recommend it. And now, with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be clear to partly cloudy with a low of 63 or 17 degrees Celsius, and then expect clear and sunny skies with a sharp rise in temperatures tomorrow. The high will be around 86 or 30 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.59 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for watching.